Hello, everyone.
Good evening.
How you
Hey,
doing?
Tanika.
Hey.
Good to see
You
you.
too.
It's been a while.
I know.
We miss your face.
I know.
Hi, everyone. Brett, I owe you a call.
Hi guys, we're going live. We're live now and all panelists are on, so we're going to get started. Good evening, everyone. My name is Alicia Johnson and I am the Executive Director of Step Up Savannah. We are excited tonight to bring you this topic, moving beyond barriers and finding restorative justice while re-entering the workforce. Joining us tonight are several of our wonderful panelists, but let me just give you a little bit of information about Step Up Savannah and why this is a topic we would want to discuss. Step Up Savannah was established in 2008 as a poverty reduction initiative, and currently we operate as a standalone 501c3 here in the Savannah area. We offer direct service programming, but we also act as an advocate, as a convener, a collaborator, and a capacity builder to address the complicated issues that surround poverty and persistent poverty in our area. Our mission and vision, Step Up believes that Savannah is a community where all people have hope and opportunity, and where we can challenge injustice, and where all community members step up to reduce poverty. As a part of Step Up's work, we were invited by Mayor Van Johnson to be a part of the Savannah ARCS Committee. ARCS stands for Advocates for Restorative Communities in Savannah. The mission of the task force is to create a supportive and enriching community environment for persons with criminal histories or who have been justice involved or justice impacted. Our vision, the vision for the task force, is a community that welcomes, supports, enriches, and celebrates the successes of persons with criminal history. And we do this in partnership. The task force is a cross-functional group of committee members who work alongside the city of Savannah. And one of my esteemed colleagues is with us tonight, who sits on that task force, is Dr. Maxine Bryant. Dr. Bryant holds a Bachelor's of Science degree from Ball State University, a master's degree from Saginaw Valley State University, and a Doctor of Philosophy and Human Services degree from Walden University. And all her degrees have a concentration in criminal justice and corrections. She is a dedicated advocate, and we are excited that she's decided to make her home here in the Savannah community and add to the work of ARCS. Also with us tonight is attorney Nancy DeVetter. And Nancy is a lawyer that operates her solo practice, the DeVetter Law Firm, which specializes in clearing criminal records. She also handles wills, probate litigation, and landlord and tenant matters. Before opening her firm in 2020, Nancy worked at Georgia Legal Services for 6 years as the head of its record restriction and reentry project and as a public benefits expert. Nancy has, we almost want to say she's Step Up staff, because she's been such an important part of our work and assisting us with our program participants. And we're so excited to have Nancy with us. Also joining us tonight is Mr. Frederick Greene, and Frederick is also part of the ARCS committee. He's a native Savannah and currently works as an adjunct professor of sociology at Point University and a professor of human service administration at St. Leo. He's a case manager for American Work here in Savannah, Georgia, and he obtained his bachelor's in religion and minor in psychology from St. Leo and a master's of social degree of social work from Savannah State. He is a proud graduate of the Step Up Savannah Construction Apprentice Program, which was years ago it was called, which is now our Chatham Apprentice Program. And he's also a proud graduate of our National Leadership Academy. And we're excited to have Frederic join the conversation with us tonight. Also, as a part of the ARCS committee, Dr. LaTrelle Porter actually serves on the subcommittee for employability with me. And she's a native of Savannah. Dr. Porter began her career with the city of Savannah in 1998 and accepted a position as an HR assistant in the city human resources department in 2001. She received her bachelor's in management from Savannah State and a human resources management from Georgia Southern. Her MA is in human resources and management from Webster. Her MS is in leadership development, and she has a PhD in management and leadership and organizational change from Walden. And she's gained valuable experience. She's been with the city of Savannah for 23 years. Her dissertation was on exploring the employability of African-American ex-offenders in local government. So she also brings a tremendous amount of expertise, and we're excited to have her here with us today. So why is this topic important? Why are we discussing it with you tonight? Scholars at Vanderbilt University have estimated that overcriminalization in the US and the bias against the poor and people of color in our criminal justice system have increased poverty rates by at least 20%. That's an astounding finding. Another study found that a family's probability of being poor is 40% greater if the father is in prison. And given that 5 million children have an imprisoned parent, overcriminalization is an enormous contributor to poverty in America. A surprising fact is that Georgia ranks number 3 in the country for jail admissions and number 4 for prison admissions. If we continue at this current rate, one study showed that since the 1970s, our trends in the US, that 1 of every 3 Black American males born today can expect to go to prison in their lifetime, 1 of every 6 Latino, and 1 of every 17 white males. What do these numbers tell us? They tell us that mass incarceration is the enemy of economic opportunity, one of the enemies of economic opportunity and economic mobility in our communities. So if we just thought about reducing the incarceration rate with an emphasis on avoiding criminal conviction by age of 18, look at the return on that investment. So if we reached individuals by intervention over the course of 5 years, we could see a significant reduction with direct economic impact and a return on investment with benefit for individual families up to $8.6 billion. Nearly 12 million jail admissions happen annually, and that's the equivalency to the populations of New York City and Los Angeles combined, and almost 19 the times of annual admissions to state and federal prisons. 3 out of 5 people in jail, I know this is going to be a surprising statistic, but 3 out of the 5 people that are currently sitting in jail are legally presumed innocent right now, and they're awaiting trial or resolution through plea negotiations or other means. An estimated almost 15% of men and 31% of women admitted to jail right now today have a serious mental illness, and rates that are 4 to 6 times higher than the general population. What does Georgia's numbers look like? So Georgia has an incarceration rate of 970 per 100,000 people, including prisons, jails, immigration, detention, juvenile justice families, meaning that Georgia locks up a higher percentage of its people more than many wealthy democracies do. And the average minimum of daily wages paid to incarcerated workers for non-industry prisons jobs is now just about 86 cents. So they're not making any money, and they won't have any when they leave today. This was astounding to me when I did some research that today Georgia incarceration rates stand out internationally. Today, Georgia locks up more people in our state than we do than any other than the entire U.S. People of color are overrepresented in prisons and jails. You can see by the prison policy initiative that the number of people incarcerated per 100,000 people in racial and ethnic groups, that disproportionately people of color are affected and impacted by these rates. How many people in Georgia are justice involved? So today, the numbers look a little like this. 527,000 Georgia residents are incarcerated or justice involved, and 404,000 are on probation or under supervision. There's a new law that's out that's called Senate Bill 402, and that law disproportionately impacts our communities here in Georgia. It's known as Senate Bill 402, and it eliminates the use of signature bonds, also known as release or on recognizance, for a number of felony charges. And we'll have Nancy speak a little bit about what this means for those who are incarcerated. But across the country, 74% of people in jail have not been convicted yet and are simply incarcerated, awaiting their day in court. So let's talk a little bit about restorative justice, why these numbers mean anything to the people who are joining us tonight and who are watching us live, and what this means for employers, for those who are seeking employment. When you hear those numbers of over 500,000 people in Georgia that are incarcerated and have to return home, have to come back to their home, we want or should want to create some successful pathways for those people to be reinstated in our community. So Dr. Bryant, can you talk to us a little bit about what the concept of restorative justice is and why it's important?
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. I appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this panel, and I'm really glad that you asked me that question. That's one question I'm prepared to answer, yes. When we look at restorative justice, what it really means is to repair the harm by bringing the community, the victim, and the perpetrator together, right? Mm-hmm. One word that we tend to use a lot in this work is reentry. Mm-hmm. Restorative justice goes beyond reentry. Reentry is when a person gets out of jail and they're given $75 and a bus ticket, not jail, I'm sorry, prison. And they're given $75 and a bus ticket and hey, go home and do the best, be a good, outstanding, law-abiding citizen. And the community shuns them. The community, employers don't want to hire, people don't want them living in their neighborhoods, and yet they're supposed to re-enter. With reintegration, the community recognizes that there's been a void because this person has been expelled from our society, and that in order for that void to be filled, the community has an onus, a responsibility, and that the person who has been harmed, regardless of the crime, recognizes that I want to be a part of the solution and not a part of the problem. And then there's a coming together of resources, of efforts, collaborative partnership, if you will, to restore the void. So when we think about restorative justice, it is repairing the harm, restoring the void, and coming together. So it's, if you think of the person who left as leaving a hole, now we all work together to fill the hole.
And so, Dr. Bryant, can you tell me, what does that look like? What would that look like in a community setting? What does that look like for a Salvation Army, or for an employer, or for a general city activity? What does that look like for us?
On a micro level,
Mm-hmm.
what it looks like is, I'm going to do micro and macro. On a
Mhm.
micro level, what it looks like is a facilitated roundtable, if you will, where the victim, maybe a member of the community, and the returning individual sit down, and the returning individual admits the harm that was done, acknowledges that harm was done, and apologizes. And then through a facilitated discussion or meeting, the victim, if you will, acknowledges that harm was done and actively forgives the person. And the community member then discusses how that harm not only hurt the victim, but also the community. And so that's on a very micro, that's a facilitated restorative justice meeting, if you will. On a macro level, what this looks like for our community organizations, for our employers, for our neighborhoods, is that we all take a responsibility in saying this person cannot successfully reintegrate by him or herself. They need us. And so then it is our responsibility. So now employers are saying, I'm willing to forgive, to work with this individual, to provide an opportunity for them to make a livable wage. If they don't learn because they were warehoused in prison and not and weren't given the opportunity to learn a trade or go to school, I'm going to train them, right? What that looks like for our community organizations, such as Salvation Army, Goodwill, what have you, is that they will use their resources. And Salvation Army has, at least the one in Savannah, has done a wonderful job in offering surround services, if you will, counseling, temporary housing, temporary jobs. For my dissertation, I worked on a concept called transitional jobs, specifically for individuals, formerly incarcerated individuals, where their salaries were subsidized for a period of time until the employer felt comfortable absorbing them into the payroll. Right? That was the ideal. So then you have your wraparound services from those community organizations. What it looks like in the neighborhoods is that the community where that person is coming back to says, I'm going to wrap my arms around you. In Indianapolis, where I'm from, I formed something called neighborhood networks, and I trained individuals who lived in communities on how to best receive people who were coming home from prison. And we would meet with them once a month and just help them to reintegrate successfully. So all of those components then are part of restorative justice.
So as we understood you at the micro level, right? So it includes the individual who may have committed a crime, and that there is a possibility that even though the person was just as involved, that there are many circumstances around that, right? That we may not all be privy to, as to some sort of issues that may surround the case that we aren't privy to. So we don't know what caused the issue or any of that. And so part of that is being open to the dialogue and the exchange. That's
Absolutely.
one. So that's on the micro level. And then at the macro level, we talk about our community resources collaborating and initiating processes that help bridge the gap, that create some scaffolding across our social safety net for this particular special circumstance that includes poverty and may include other things such as adverse childhood experiences or other traumas that are associated in the area. And then at this kind of umbrella, or like I like to say, the 50,000 foot level, it also includes our employers, and those of us who are working to connect. And so the social safety net kind of acts as a bridge into employment, and helps to stabilize the individual. Is that correct?
Yes, and let me just add this one last statement. For the past 5 years, I think it's been here in Savannah, I've had a conference that's called When is the Debt Paid? And for society, as long as we continue to want to punish the individual after they've returned home from prison, we are never allowing their debt to be paid. Well, in actuality, the time that they did paid for the crime. And so now that they're out, we have to own up to our part of the responsibility. Now, it's not all us. They are accountable also, and we need to hold them accountable. But there's a way to do that without shaming, and there's a way to do that without oppressing. And when we do that, then we can allow them to live in a way that their debt is paid, and now we're accepting them into the community.
Right. So, Dr. Porter, I want to pivot a little bit to you, because as Dr. Bryant mentioned, that this includes a collective community response, right? That that involves everyone. And when we talk about the socioeconomic impact of not providing jobs or bridges or opportunities to jobs, that it could lead to reincarceration, other offenses, or something like that. And so we know that nearly 75% of formerly incarcerated individuals are still unemployed at least a year after their release. So can you talk to us a little bit, and I'll bring up this slide for you about that and why it's important for employers to do just that. Dr. Porter, are you on mute?
Yes, no, I'm off mute now. Thank you for having me. I appreciate the invite. I think it's important because, like Dr. Bryant said, once these individuals have returned home to their communities, it's important that we allow them to have a second chance in the community by obtaining employment so that they can live and provide for their families, because that is an issue for those individuals coming back to their communities. They may not come back directly to their community, but they're going back to a community so that they can live and provide for their families. So within the state of Georgia, as of this year, 2021, we have the highest incarcerated rate, 25% of the world's total prison population. Texas, California, and Florida are behind us. We rank 9th as the highest prison rate per 100,000. If you look at the numbers for 2019 in July, we had the highest number of incarcerated individuals worldwide in 2019, almost 2 years ago. In May, we ranked 10th for the state of Georgia. In 2018, we had the 4th highest rate for incarceration in the United States. Then it was Oklahoma, Louisiana, and Mississippi. African-American male men are 7 times more likely than white males to be incarcerated. That's almost 8 and 10. At some point in their life, like you said earlier, they will be incarcerated. One of the reasons why there's such an impact of the criminal record is because it's hard for them to acquire job skills, employment, and network once they get out, because when they're incarcerated, they lose all of that. They no longer have those connections, and this starts during their whole entire life course. So from the time they are able to work until the time that they're incarcerated, until the time that they get out.
And so part of that restorative justice model, and you're echoing some of what Dr. Bryant indicated, is that education is critical to job readiness and to employee retention and economic mobility, right?
Exactly.
So part of it is finding those connections to workforce development programs and other opportunities.
Yes.
That we should be making those things available in order to create a restorative community here.
Yes, and that's one thing as organizations we should be willing to do. Mm-hmm. That's a part of the social change within our own communities, because individuals who have criminal records, there's a perception and a stigma associated with the criminal record. So you have your community, you have your employer, and when you go for a job interview, you also have that hiring manager with a perception of you as a criminal or a former criminal. They already have this in their mind that you are a bad person. They don't see the good that you have to offer because they don't allow you to have that chance to show what you have to offer to that employer. Employers have attitudes, biases, and perceptions. We know that those are ingrained. It's implicit bias. Those are taught to us growing up, but there's a way to alleviate that, because you have to be aware of your biases as an individual and work towards eliminating those so you do not have them towards someone who has a criminal record. Okay, African American men are more disproportionately arrested, convicted, and incarcerated than any other race.
Wow. And isn't it true that they're more likely to re-enter?
They are more likely to re-enter within a year. If they do not have employment, they are more likely to return to prison.
Okay.
Okay. Back in 2019, the SHRM Foundation, it's a human resources organization, they initiated the Getting Talent Back to Work initiative. And what this was an initiative that championed the hiring of individuals with criminal records, because they're an untapped talent pool that basically has been shut out of the labor market. So they don't have the opportunities as we do, persons without criminal records. There are limited opportunities. So more specifically, what this initiative wants is business executives and association leaders to sign a pledge to consider qualified individuals for job opportunities within their organizations, regardless of their criminal records, so that they can have a second chance. So a lot of organizations have signed the pledge. Nationwide is over 600,000 that have signed the pledge. I signed it myself because this is something that I am passionate about. My dissertation is on it and I'm passionate about it, and I believe in giving people second chances. And I think that's something that's needed in the community. So if you look at this, there are different types of things that employers will be willing to overlook. The one that's most prevalent is the substance abuse one for DUI or drug-related crimes. 65% of managers compared to, that's okay, 78% of HR professionals are willing to overlook substance-related felonies. The misdemeanors came in second at 67 and 70%. And then you have property, violent, financial crimes, and sexual felonies that fall in after that. Next slide. Thank you. Why is this such a good business decision? Because it's good for talent and it's good for your business. A survey was conducted that indicated that 75% of Americans are comfortable with businesses hiring individuals with criminal records. So we know that people are more comfortable now than they were, let's say 10, 15 years ago, hiring individuals with criminal records. 78% will also buy goods or services from organizations that hire non-violent offenders. So there is a change, but the change is kind of slow. It's not as prevalent. It's very slow. Next slide. So why is this important? Hiring individuals with criminal records. We all know that it's over 2.3 million that are incarcerated. 1 in 3 adults do have a criminal record. 95% of the people in state prisons will be released each year within to their communities. It may not be within Chatham County. It could be in Cobb County. It could be in Fulton County. It can be in any county within the state of Georgia, because they may not necessarily come back home. So wherever they went to prison, they're released back into that community. Okay, 75% of formerly incarcerated individuals will remain unemployed for 1 year. So this is why we need to do things as a community and as organizations to help these individuals who've already served their time, like Dr. Bryant said, and give them an opportunity to rehabilitate, teach them the skills that they need, whether it's computer skills, mechanic skills, whatever it is. We need to be teaching them those skills, soft skills, hard skills, whatever skills that they need to be effective and contribute back to the community. So what can we do as organizations? One, we need to determine how we're going to correct the systematic and systemic inequalities within the community. What are the root causes that make successful reentry for these men coming back to the community and women so difficult? That's what we need to make sure that we find out.
Okay.
Alicia, I'd like to ask a quick question. Coming through the chat box, we have an attendee on who has asked it to share his story. I don't know if we have time for that now or maybe a little later, and he
We
did.
can, we'll ask him a little later. We're going to actually be pivoting now to Frederick Greene, who's part of our arts committee, and to talk about experiences and his experiences with working also with individuals returning and navigating employment in the system.
Yes, good evening, everybody. Thank you,
Good
Ms.
evening.
Johnson. It's a pleasure being on this panel with you. Yeah, I think that, and from my experience, for me, education has been the great equalizer. And so it was exceptionally hard post-incarceration for me. There wasn't a lot of programs that were available that are available now. And pretty much like Dr. Porter spoke of, that, and you always speak about that safety network, and that safety net was not there. So for me, and I can only speak from my experience, I had to just get it by any means necessary. When I say that, it was times, and Dr. Bryant always laughed at me when I share this, but I lied on applications. I lied on school applications. I had to get it, and I felt that if I became so important with whatever job or employment opportunity that I had, that they would just, and that was one of the cases when I was in food and beverage, it allowed me to be able to become so important in the employment sector that they said, well, go back and just refill out the application and put yes. And so I think that, like Dr. Porter said, implicit bias plays a role in it. But one of the things that I'm trying to do is, and why I always share this story and always are willing to step on any panel and talk from a impacted, justice involved individual, is because I seek to remove the stigma that's attached to it. I always want to also change the narrative that justice involved and justice impacted individuals, if given the right support, the right safety net, they can have successful reintegration. You know, it was programs like step, and right now as a social worker, I would like to offer what you call the installation of hope. So some of the things that's worked well for me is I utilize every program that I came in contact with, whether or not I had to go through the bureaucratic red tape or whatever I had to do, I utilized those programs as a way to gain some upward mobility. So for instance, Step Up, 2007 construction apprenticeship program, where I said, hey, if I can learn construction skills and they're going to send me back to school, I can buy a house and flip it. And I could do all of the work myself. So that was my goal. And so I just encourage everybody to utilize every stepping stone. I met Dr. Bryant, and I always share this story. I met Dr. Bryant through sitting at a women's at the round table discussion that created an opportunity for me to work on a major city initiative. And so use every stepping stone. I just encourage everybody to use every stepping stone, every program. And for those who are directors of organizations, that we have to make it realistic for individuals. We have to, one of the things that me and Dr. Bryant tried to implement with EGV was priority services for individuals who are just as involved and just as impacted, because without those things, people will recidivate. But I would like to offer a narrative change and a shift of our thinking process and paradigm. I believe that there's just as many individuals who are out there who have successfully reintegrated, who are business owners, who are husbands, who are fathers, who have paid their debt, and they are doing what it takes. They are productive citizens, but yet though that's not what's being projected in society. You know, we focus a lot. Restorative justice also focuses on those individuals, not just the recidivism rate. That's more on the end of retributive justice.
Right.
But then there's a lot of individuals who are out here who are taxpayers, who have gotten married, who are taking care of their children, and they are successful stories that they have reintegrated back in society, and not only been rehabilitated, but have been habilitated. Me and Dr. Bryant often talk about the differentiation between rehabilitation and habilitation. The acquiring of the necessary skills is what the organizations have to offer a lot of individuals, because some people don't have the skills to even be rehabilitated. Right. So I just wanted to share that. And that's kind of been my experience.
Well, we thank you for sharing that, Freddie. And you are a prime example of what can happen if given the opportunity. And so we certainly appreciate you sharing your story with us. And one of the things that you mentioned there, we laugh when you talk about that, even on the task force, when you mentioned that you fudged applications, but when you got on the job, you were a stellar employee, so much so that they were willing to overlook that you fudged the application. So I want to pivot a little bit to Attorney DeVetter to talk about that, Nancy. We know that Georgia's a ban the box state, right? And we know that the city has banned the box, but banning the box isn't enough. So can you talk to us a little bit? I mentioned Senate Bill 402, that, you know, that pretrial policy, the law that has got a lot of people sitting in jail right now, that are really presumed innocent. They haven't even been convicted yet, but you know they will leave that time as being justice impacted, because they're likely sitting there. They've lost employment, lost opportunities, and so on. So can you talk about what are some policy considerations and how policy and law kind of underpin this, and some of the barriers and things that you've seen in helping people get reconnected and re-entering into the community and even back to work.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. This is quite the panel, and everyone on here is really doing great work. And thank you for including me. I mean, we've already talked a bit about some of the policies, and there is so much to do in this area. We can talk about basic criminal justice reform efforts like not requiring signature bonds, that people who can't afford a bond will sit in jail. I have plenty of clients who've told me, I pled guilty to a crime that I didn't even commit because I couldn't sit in jail anymore. I had to get back to work. I had to get back to my kids. I needed to get on with my life. So, I just went ahead and pled guilty so I could get out of jail. So a signature bond bill like the one that you were discussing, like 402, would address those issues. I mean, honestly, with technology being the way it is kind of hard to run from the police these days. We don't really need to have people put up a quarter of their home or, 10% of a large bond in order to guarantee this to the state that they will show up for trial. That's just kind of an outdated idea that we have. And of course, it disproportionately impacts people that have low income.
Right. And people who are in poverty are always disproportionately impacted by a lot of these laws and policies. And I think as you're sharing, the fact that, poverty is a constructed thing, right? And it's been institutionalized and policy underpins it. It keeps the cycle going.
Right. And I'm sure we all have friends who were able to get a different outcome than a similar friend who had charges because of their income, because they could afford to bail out, because they could afford to wait out the system that encourages you to enter a plea. There's so many issues with policy, things that we could talk about today. I do want to highlight an important bill that is going to be heard by the Senate tomorrow, and that is SB 105, which is a bill that would continue to update our probation system. One of the Georgia stats we didn't talk about, and thank you so much for sharing all the stats that shows that Georgia actually has a huge problem with over-incarceration and over-enforcement. One of the scariest stats is that we put people on probation almost 3 times longer than any other state. Coming from, I used to practice in Atlanta, and coming down here, it just blows my mind how many people are serving 10-year sentences for drug offenses. And when you put someone on probation for 10 years, you are really eliminating so many of their opportunities. Because even if we get employers to look past the stigma of a past conviction, if you are still on probation, even though from my mind, you're under, you're going to be the best employee ever, because you are risking having your probation revoked. That is a very delicate place to be. And we also find that people in the Chatham County Jail, because we do release most misdemeanors pretty quickly, the people that are sitting in the Chatham County jail are people that had minor probation violations.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, Judge Colbert has even mentioned that as a problem, and us looking into what we can do.
Yeah. So there's all sorts of ways to reform our probation system, to give discretion to judges, to encourage people like our new DA who are willing to relook at some of the sentencing practices. And someone in the chat asked, why do we lock up so many people? And of course, institutional racism is a big problem, and that still exists in our city, in our county, in a lot of the smaller counties that I deal in. That there are people that are treated differently because of their background and because of their race, and we know the stats are there. So we have that, and we have a society that has responded to essentially small crimes with cannons. Lock up people for things like criminal trespass and disorderly conduct, things that we didn't care about from a societal point of view until 50 years ago. Even drug use. And we have the war on drugs. We have prosecution of minor offenses. We have this institutional system that punishes people of color and people for being poor. So in order to move fully past this, I think it's extremely important to encourage employers, of course. I think that's the main place to start, because we have people that are doing everything they can. They're getting their education. They're trying to get the skills. They're doing everything they can to move past, but they can't move past the stigma that other people have against them. So encouraging employers to hire people, because actually we don't really have ban the backs in Georgia. It's only for state of Georgia jobs.
Right.
And we're encouraging the city to do its own, but we don't have it for most employers. For the vast majority of employers, they can treat someone differently because of their background and ask, a lot of questions about that. But thankfully, we did just do some major expungement reform for the first time starting in January. Millions of Georgians are now eligible to expunge their record and to seal it, which helps people move on past a criminal record. Before January, if you had a misdemeanor conviction or a felony conviction, you really had no way to ever expunge that, which is what most states offer a path after a certain amount of time to do that. So
can you explain expungement, what that means, and what does that look like for a person who may be eligible, who didn't know that they're eligible? If they're listening into the conversation, can you explain that concept?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I use the word expungement because that's what people understand the concept of limiting who can have access to your criminal record. Some places call it expungement. In Georgia, we call it record restriction because we restrict who actually has access to your arrest record. And then we seal records so people can't get your court records. And it's usually just as important to seal your record as to get your arrest record restricted. But the short of it is that people are now eligible to do that could never do that before. Now, under Georgia law, if you have a misdemeanor and it's been more than 4 years since your last conviction, you can request for it to be expunged. You can only do that twice in your life. But the vast majority of Georgians who have a criminal record only have one thing on their record, and it's a misdemeanor. So that helped so many Georgians be able to clear that misdemeanor marijuana, criminal trespass, disorderly conduct, simple battery. There are exceptions and rules for violent crimes, and for sex crimes are generally not eligible. But even felonies now are eligible for expungement if you get them pardoned. So you have to go through the pardon process. And again, sex and violent crimes are not eligible. The pardon process requires a 5-year waiting period from the end of your last sentence. So there's a longer waiting period for that. And a pardon isn't guaranteed. But it's a great option for people that, had a drug addiction 20, 30 years ago and have multiple felonies. And it's very difficult for them to move past that. So there are a lot more options now to expunge your record. But again, even if you get it expunged, sometimes you can't take down that news article because that's First Amendment right. So it's still, I think we still have to, all parts of society, employers, housing providers, family members, we all need to come in and support people that have criminal records because most of them have been treated unfairly. And it's just, a huge detriment to our society to let that continue. As we know, the most important predictor of recidivism is making sure people have good jobs.
Right.
You can get people into good employment, they don't get arrested again. And that helps keep our society more safe.
Absolutely. So, Nancy, there's a stat out there that says more than 50% of background checks that are conducted by the FBI, even as high level as the FBI, include erroneous information. If I happen to be one of those people that have erroneous information on my background check, what can I do?
The Georgia law allows a path to correct that record. And you essentially get a copy of the corrected record and you send it to the reporting agency. Even it might be the police department that reported the information. It's usually the court. Either they didn't update the disposition or they've miscited, put in the code incorrectly. And Georgia has, hundreds of courts and small agencies. So errors are very common, but you have the right to request that to be corrected. And you have the right to appeal and have a hearing if they don't do the correction.
Okay. Well, we're going to leave some time now to answer some of the questions that are in our chat. We want to thank all of our panelists and thank you guys. You gave great information, and we want to open it up now for any of our attendees or any of the social media questions that are out there.
Cool. I'll start with the first one. We got around 6:30, and this is to the group. From what I understand. The question is, why aren't skills being developed while folks are imprisoned?
I'll start with that one. There was a time in our history in the United States where prison was seen or viewed as a place for people to get skills. Incarcerated individuals were able to get a Pell Grant. We had many universities that offered classes by professors in the prisons. Trade and vocational schools were rampant. They were present in many prisons. Um, uh, right, like in the late 1980s, a person wrote a paper, and it was said, it was entitled "Nothing Works," and it addressed the fact that after incarceration, people were still recidivating, and that paper got widespread notoriety. And people began to believe the false narrative that educating people while they were in prison didn't do any good. And so programs began to be reduced. And also the programs cost money. And so it was easier, if you're going to cut a budget, let's cut these programs. They're not working anyway. And what was left was a skeleton of any type of educational program. It was deemed that people in prison were unable to gain a skill. It wasn't worth putting your dollars there. And we began putting our dollars in incarceration and not in educating people while they were incarcerated. That's a brief synopsis.
Also, that adds to that is the privatization of prisons, right? So yeah, so we have in our in our society, in our capitalistic society, we have it. You can now invest in prisons, right? You can buy stock in a company that owns prisons. They're private, and so there was this pipeline that kind of moved people into, shuffled into that pipeline. Typically, people again who are disproportionately impacted, like low income, people in poverty, people of color, who were part of that process. And essentially, they became free labor. And so there was less money invested in programs and more money invested in the creation of these prisons and systems that that had massive opportunities for people to work for free and for a little of nothing. Does anybody else want to add to that? All right, Alex, do we have another question out there?
Yes. Earlier, we received a question. I think it was the first, I can't remember who was talking about. It was in the very beginning, we were talking about Georgia, like Georgia rates compared to the country, national trends for the rest of the country. And so the question is, why does Georgia have these high prison rates compared to, comparable places?
So Nancy, do you want to take a?
Sure. Yeah, I touched on that a little bit when I was talking. Obviously, we are a conservative state. We are tough on crime. It's been one of our policies for a long time. And we know now that tough on crime policies pretty much end up with people having a lot more criminal records than didn't have before, and leads to people not being able to access the job and services that they deserve. So we have a longstanding policy of being tough on crime. Obviously, systemic racism is a large issue. We're in the Deep South here. And I'm trying to think of exactly why we have, we put people on paper longer than anybody else. These are policies that we've selected and that we thought were best for us as a state. But unfortunately, what it's led to is more justice incarcerated, more justice involved people than most other states, and it's really hurt us.
And that would include like mandatory sentencing and. things like that, right, Nancy? So,
Right.
you
And
know,
we also have, socioeconomic issues where even if someone has a record, we don't also have basic things like, Medicaid for low income people. We don't have a lot of the basic social structures that help people move on past a difficult situation. So that when we see, someone that is in a tough spot, we don't provide social programs to help them move out of that. So it can be a self-perpetuating cycle. Until I think in 2016, Georgia was one of the few states that didn't allow people with a drug conviction to get food stamps.
right.
We finally got rid of that, but it was, something that, most other states looked at, everybody passed it at one point, and then the states were like, well, this is dumb. We have child molesters. I mean,
Right.
Obviously I have do a lot of advocacy for people with for sex offenders, because we are also updating our laws there so that people that shouldn't be affected aren't. But to allow, people with more serious crimes to not be able to have food stamps, and drug offenders not to be able to have food stamps. So there's a lot of as a state, we've had a lot of policy issues that perpetuate this.
May I jump in there to piggyback on Nancy? Nancy, you may remember this. Well, I guess it's probably still true. Georgia has the 7 deadly sins. Do we still have that? Right. And so that led tremendously to a high incarceration rate. Georgia decided as a part of its policy to be very punitive and how we treat people who have broken the law, and to be very unforgiving. Alicia, Ms. Johnson, you mentioned about mandatory minimums, and there's also the 3 strikes you're out. And I ran across an article, I'm gonna make this real quick, about a woman in Georgia who was convicted of shoplifting. Now, what she was shoplifting was baby formula. Now, I have to imagine she must have stolen a lot of baby formula, but nevertheless, it was her 3rd conviction. She was sentenced to something crazy like 40 years because of the mandatory sentencing that went with 3 strikes, you're out. Was that good use of our taxpayer dollars? Was there something really going on? And like you said earlier, Ms. Johnson, we're not asking the right questions. We're not asking what happened to you. We're not asking the why behind the crime. And when we don't do that, we're more apt to get involved with bad policy, like Nancy just said.
I do want to mention one other thing too. When Dr. Porter was talking about, what employers, how they treat certain convictions, my clients that I have the toughest time with are people that were low income or impoverished and have deposit account fraud, right? They were arrested and have a record because they wrote a bad check, and we have criminalized poverty on some levels. So, and now that they have essentially a financial fraud charge, it's extremely difficult for them to get a lot of jobs, because even if you want to start at the cash register, you're not allowed to be there. There are some pending bills. I think Deep Center, their legislative agenda lays out some great ones. I think we're, trying to raise the juvenile code from 17 to 18, right? So that we do not prosecute children as adults. Some of those things that I think in retrospect, you look back and say, maybe sending someone who was 17 for something they did when they were 15 to jail for 20 years is not the smart thing to do. So yeah, I know we could talk about this all night, but I'll stop myself.
All right, Alex.
Yeah, so I have 2 questions left. And actually the first one comes from me, and it's rather kind of a new idea. So forgive me if, I may stumble over, it's not a fully formed thought yet. But I had read something that there's, like, we know that like wealth inequity exists in incarceration. And it was just a really interesting take. Someone had spoke about people on death row, and how you really don't hear about stories from people from wealthy families on death row, or really, with long sentences from high families. So I just wanted to kind of maybe hear everyone's thoughts on, the idea of wealth inequity and the high cost of being poor.
Does anybody want to talk about that first? Because we know if you have more money, you can get a team of attorneys. You can, there's a lot there just to start out with their entry. They're more likely to be presumed innocent. They're more likely to have, different jury makeup and so on that actually lead to better outcomes for them. And if I'm wealthy, I could have a jury expert on my team that helps me even select a jury of my peers to review my case. But Nancy, do you want to talk a little bit about that? Nancy, Dr. Porter, Dr. Bryant, and Frederick.
Yeah, most times people that the wealth inequities, most times I call it people are railroaded by the system because they have improper legal representation. And a lot of the cases can be resolved, but without proper legal representation. And you have a court-appointed attorney who has 100 people on the caseload. In the age of during the time they had one age, what they call the age of the plea agreement. I'm gonna come in and give you this quick deal, and then because of individual is tired of sitting, like Nancy spoke of earlier, they just take the deal. I want to go ahead and I want to get it over with. But when you talk about individuals who are more affluent, they can even buy the case. And so I think that's one of the things that organizations need to start doing is be able to provide proper legal representation for individuals. Because let us not forget, and I say this on every meeting, that we have a lot of people that are just as involved and just as impacted who haven't went through due process, but they still face the same barriers that individuals who have been convicted face. They still face barriers in housing and employment, and they haven't even been convicted yet. So with the proper legal representation, then sometimes you had a great exoneration project that's going on, the Innocence Project, where they're finding a lot of people are being found that they was never guilty in the first place.
Yeah, and now we have the Bail Project here, who's actually providing for those who meet income thresholds opportunities for restorative bail process. So Nancy, do you want to?
I was just going to add, to echo what Mr. Greene was saying, that that's another policy decision. Georgia has intentionally not provided public defense. I can't, of course, remember the history off the top of my head, but normally our public defense system is not funded as well as our prosecutorial system, and that district attorneys do usually make more than public defenders. That used to be the case, and I haven't kept up with the numbers recently. And there's some places, Chatham is fortunate in that we have provided public defenders for misdemeanors, and a lot of places do not do that. So we again, that's a policy decision where we've decided not to provide representation or adequate representation to defendants. And of course, you can see how that plays out.
Okay, moving on to the second question. I know we are right at the hour. Dr. Bryant, you had mentioned a few moments ago the cost from taxpayers associated with keeping these institutions open. So the question is, can you show, let me see if I got this, show the rate, associate the extraordinary rate of incarceration. Am I reading this right? I'm sorry, maybe I misunderstood.
Let's see if I see that. It says, can you show the cost associated with this extraordinary rate of incarceration? And is there an inverse correlation to incarceration and the level of crime committed?
So I cannot show like right offhand a statistical comparison in terms of, I think you said the cost of incarceration and what was the other part?
The question was the extraordinary rate of this incarceration in Georgia. What does the cost look like for Georgia? I can tell you it's quite a large sum. I can't remember the number right off the top of my head, but if we get her information, Alex, we can send her link to that information. And then the second part of the question was not just the cost, is there an inverse correlation to incarceration and the level of crime committed?
Yeah, we would like to think that the more we incarcerate, the lower the crime rate.
But that is not.
No. So there is no correlation to point to saying that there's a benefit in over criminalizing or over incarcerating, and that would make us have a safer society. There is no correlation to that. As a matter of fact, the numbers would point to the opposite. Because if we address the causes behind incarceration and arrest even, and that's a whole nother conversation, we would find that our numbers of crime would continue to go down, but there's no correlation.
Yes. And a lot of this information you can find on, there's tons of studies, okay? So the policy initiatives is out there. Back to business research and policy is out there. So there's lots of data present and that's out there for research. But we can definitely get some more information out for you. Any other questions, Alex?
No, that is all of the questions.
Well, again, we want to thank our panelists. Before we go, we want to talk a little bit, just to close us out, about some of those direct service programs that we mentioned. Step Up has several direct service programs that serve the community. That includes our AmeriCorps Vista program, where we're actually placing volunteers into the social safety net to support it. We have our Chatham Apprentice program, which is what Frederick mentioned. It's our workforce development program, and we actually have a lot of folks who are re-entering into the community that we assist in bridging that gap and creating some bridges for them. Level Up is our new financial literacy model that we've just put out. We have our neighborhood leadership program that creates community advocates and provides a structured environment for them to learn leadership skills and learn how to advocate for themselves to system and for the community. We also have a public benefits program where we are supporting people with public benefit enrollment. We have 8 agency partners across the county that work with us to do that. And we have the Working Family Network. On with us tonight is Ms. Tanika Rivers, who is also our Chatham Apprentice Program manager, which is our workforce development program. And I'll let Tanika tell you a little bit more about this program and why it's an excellent opportunity for those who are returning back to the community and wanting to get some assistance.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I promise I won't keep you much longer. The Chatham Apprentice Program helps unemployed and underemployed residents of Chatham County find or create career paths that offer family-sustaining wages and opportunities for advancement. We offer soft skills and professional development training. We have a healthy eating component, financial literacy, behavior and substance abuse counseling. We have record restriction and expungement assistance. We also, as an incentive for completing the program, which is 4 weeks, 16 days, 80 hours of training, 4 days a week, we offer forklift safety certification. We help pay for a TWIC card, a SurfSave certification, or a partial CDL certification, scholarship, excuse me. We also, it's coming soon, we have the reentry education module for Grow with Google and a tech job shadowing opportunity. We also, starting in April, we are going to implement a OSHA safety, OSHA 10 general industry certification. So our next class is coming up in March 29th through April the 22nd, and it's going to be from 11 to 3. And everything right now is virtual due to COVID. And so the link is on there as well for anyone who's interested. We do ages 18 and older. So that's the Chamber Apprentice Program. We'd always like to say E3, educate, empower, and employ.
Thank you, Tanika. If you're interested in learning more about Step Up, this topic, how you can help become a volunteer or get connected, we're located right here in Savannah. We're at 428 Bull Street, Suite 208. And you can connect with us online at www.stepupsavannah.org. We're on all social media platforms. You can like our page, so you can continue to get information about our programming and about issues like this. This video is going to be available online, so you get the opportunity to listen again and to take more in and learn about it. If you would like to get in contact with any of our panelists, we ask that you shoot us an email over here at Step Up Savannah, and we will be happy to get you connected. You can email us at admin@stepupsavannah.org or at media, MEDIA, at stepupsavannah.org, and we will get you connected. Once again, we want to salute our great colleagues and panelists from the Arts Task Force, Dr. Maxine Bryant, Dr. LaTrelle Porter, Nancy DeVetter, and Frederick Greene. And if you are in need of expungement services or in need of a great attorney, we certainly recommend Nancy. She's done a great job, and we love her. So tell her that Step Up sent you. So again, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to our next opportunity to share information with you. Good night.
Thanks, guys.